up? It's your internet historians, and in today's episode, we will be discussing the history behind the movie Titanic. So, Titanic is an epic, action-packed romance set against the ill-fated maiden voyage of the RMS Titanic, the pride and joy of the White Star Line, and at the time, the largest moving object ever built. She was the most luxurious liner of her era, the ship of dreams, which ultimately carried over 1,500 people to their death in the ice-cold waters of the North Atlantic in the early hours of April 15th, 1912. So, movie thoughts, what are they?
This movie's depressing.
It was a lot more cheesy than I remember it. It was like some of the lines I was like, oh God, I can't.
I feel like it's still classic though. I mean, I remember too when I was younger watching it thinking it was like very sad and depressing, but like it's also weird that they also have this love story going on during the whole depressing.
Well, I felt like it was definitely necessary so that we can see the whole entire ship.
Oh, I guess that makes sense. Yeah, to see like both like first class versus third class. That's a good point.
Yeah, and then also when they were kind of running around, running away from the whatever his name is, they went into the
whatever.
Yeah, the gun.
He was like, what was he? He was like a marshal or some sort.
Yeah,
he
was like weird, a bodyguard of that one dude.
But because they also went down to like the boiler room where they were like throwing the coals and stuff. We got to see that as well. So I understand why they had to put it in a way to kind of show the entirety of the ship. But it was so cheesy. I just cannot at some of the lines. Every time you heard the flute, I was like, oh God, here it comes.
Dude, I feel like every single time the like sex scene that they have, I remember watching that when I was younger too and just being very, very uncomfortable. And like, I don't know, it's just funny. Like now it's like, and then like drags.
Oh my God.
In the car. Yeah. I remember thinking that was so like, oh my God.
So scandalous. But yeah, it was like, I don't know. I mean, I know there are some people that this is like their favorite movie. First of all, it's long.
So
like
long.
What, 3 hours or something? Yeah, it's long as heck. So it's crazy to me that it's been in theaters so many times, and every single time it just tops the box office. I mean, it was even like a point of like contest with, who put this out? Fox? Or not Fox. Is it Fox? I don't remember. 20th Century Fox? Yeah, anyway. They like didn't even want to release a movie this long because they're just like, it's not gonna, make money. Like people aren't gonna go and see it again. Wrong, but it's just like, and I hadn't seen it in so long, and then I was like live texting you guys while watching it because I don't know the last time that I've seen it. I'm just like, this movie first of all, gives me major anxiety the entire time. Like obviously I know the outcome of the movie, but like every time they're together, like I'm just like, oh man, her fiance is gonna come by, like someone's gonna see, like it's just like, it just gave me so much anxiety. And then the whole, like I said, like, oh, when I was texting you guys, like the whole last hour and a half is just people dying.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it's like
so upsetting.
I feel like it was a regular movie for the most part, like any other romance movie, but then the last like part where when they actually hit the iceberg, then that's when everything obviously goes downhill, and then that's when it gets very like, I don't know.
Yeah. Speaking on the random like love affair thing, I mean that's kind of one of the things that James Cameron kind of had to use to sell the movie, because James Cameron is just like a huge like marine archaeology buff and mostly just wanted the movie company to pay for him to go see the Titanic. So I mean he kind of shoehorned that in there. He's just like, well, I got to keep people interested, so I'm gonna make up this romance to keep it going.
Well, I feel like in order for it to be a success in theaters, there has to be some type of romance going on.
I mean, to be fair, do we really want to go see a movie where we know the ship is going to sink? It's like...
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. There has to be something of some type of surprise thing going on for people to actually enjoy it. Because, I mean, it's hard to enjoy a movie that is, like you said, about death and depressing.
Right.
And something that actually happened to thousands of people, and, like, people, their families are affected by it. So yeah, they had to add something like that in there. Also, I wanted to ask you guys if you have been to the little museum type thing that they had for Titanic. I think there was one in San Francisco for a while. It's basically like they bring like
in Vegas.
Yeah, I think there was one in Vegas too, or they brought it to Vegas. But it's basically like a museum about the Titanic, and you can see people that were like their stories that were the people that were on the ship and stuff like that. I just wanted to know if you guys saw it.
I read about the
been,
lady, the last survivor, and I all I read was that she wasn't too pleased about these movies because it was traumatic for a lot of people, and a lot of people lost a family member, and she didn't feel like it was right to
sensationalize it.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel like, well, first of all, she was 2 months old when she was on that ship, so it's not like she has like PTSD. Sorry, lady. I mean, she's dead, but it's just like
No, I know where you're coming. I know what you mean. Like, she didn't actually experience the trauma of like running around and, you know, I think because she lost her father, maybe, and she saw the aftermath of her mom. I mean, I don't know,
yeah,
you know,
I guess that makes sense.
because they were supposed to like move to America and start a whole new life, and they actually had to go back to England.
I don't know. I don't even think. I mean, which I don't know. You guys might talk about Murdoch, the like second in command or whatever to the captain. He was a real character.
The one who was bribed.
Was he bribed?
Yeah, the fiance put money in his jacket, and then later he was like, I paid you, and he was like, your money means nothing.
Yeah.
That's pretty much like out of everybody, that's like the only person that the like head of sorry, and to correct myself from earlier, it was Paramount who put it out in America, and internationally it was Fox. But anyway, the vice president of Paramount like went to his relatives and like apologized because of the way that they portrayed him, which I mean, James Cameron isn't, I mean, he agrees that he probably shouldn't have done that, but at the same time, they needed something in that moment to dramatize, and it's unfortunate that it was a real person. For the most part, I feel like James Cameron did a good job and didn't over like sensationalize people too much. JC got sent to Canada back when he was in the Navy still to do war games with Canada with a submarine up there. And so I went and visited him in Nova Scotia. And Nova Scotia, the ship sank off the coast of Newfoundland and Nova Scotia. And Nova Scotia, I guess they came to their aid, I guess. But
I was going to say, isn't that the people who came to rescue them?
Yeah, they have a maritime museum there and a big Titanic exhibit, which is really cool. And they have a lot of stuff there, and kind of like what they do with all the other Titanic museums, you can like follow in the footsteps of a first class, second class, third class passenger, which is pretty cool.
I was just going to say, for me, it's like I do think that it is a historical moment, and it changed a lot of regulations. And I think that even though it was a tragic thing that happened, it is something we should remember and should continue to tell about, you know.
Definitely. And I think with any historical film, I think especially since that's all we do is watch these films, there's obviously things that are sensationalized and whatnot, but it's because it is a film for entertainment, and so they also have to do their job in entertaining the audience that they're trying to make the film for as well. So the Titanic, the museum, real fast, we're all over the place.
I'm sorry.
Any thoughts? No, it's fine. I just thought, I remember when I went with my family in San Francisco like years and years and years ago, and I remember the museum feeling very like depressive too, and like it was just weird because it's like I feel like it's very somber, I guess you can say. Not
is it like the Holocaust Museum? I forgot where that one is. It's in New York, or
I don't think
DC. There's a
DC
Holocaust museum.
Yeah, I think it's in DC.
I mean, I haven't been to that one, so I don't know, but I just remember kind of feeling very somber because they have things like they show like what the rooms look like, and they even have that staircase redone there, and it's just kind of weird because it's like you feel like you're like, oh crap, this is like a real event. Like you're kind of I guess, what is it, like not relating to it, but it's like you're feeling more of like a connection, I guess, because it's like you're actually walking where people kind of walked and like saw things that they saw, and it's just weird. And then they even have like a big old block of ice, and they're like this is like kind of like what ice, whatever, how cold it was or whatever the hell. They give more like of like actual facts and stuff like that about the actual Titanic, which is cool. Because I guess, I don't know if I'm thinking correctly, but I think like a few years ago, people didn't know Titanic was an actual event. They thought it was just
I believe it.
I think I saw that somewhere
I believe that 100%.
Yeah, I think I saw that somewhere online where it was like a thing where people were like, oh my God, people didn't know that this is an actual thing. They just think it's a movie or whatever. But anyways, I think that's what I remember correctly, because I was just thinking about it earlier, and I was like, I'm pretty sure people didn't know it was a real event.
The whole time I was watching it, I kept thinking about the USS Indianapolis. Have you guys heard of that one? They was briefly mentioned in Jaws. It was basically like a Navy ship doing like a secret mission, and they were hit with like a torpedo and they sank. And they ended up being in the waters for like a couple days, and it kind of is like more of a shark movie because they had to kind of like go get like, you know, fight against the sharks. The movie itself is like not very good. Nicolas Cage is in it, but I was like super interested in the story because it's like, could you imagine being in the water for like several days, because they were on a secret mission, so no one thought about checking in with them, you know what I mean? And they were lucky they got somebody found them. But anyways,
well, speaking on Nicole and the point that maybe people don't even know much about the Titanic, unlike what I thought. I just assumed everybody would know everything about Titanic. Should I read about it? I don't know. Should I talk about it?
Ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense to do that first. Okay. So the RMS Titanic, which stands for Royal Mail Ship, which is weird. Titanic was a British passenger liner operated by the White Star Line that sank in the North Atlantic Ocean in the early hours of the 15th of April, 1912. After striking iceberg during her maiden voyage from Southampton to New York City. Of the estimated 2,224 passengers and crew on board, more than 1,500 died, making the sinking one of modern history's deadliest peacetime commercial marine disasters. Titanic was the largest ship afloat at the time, and she entered service and was the second of 3 Olympic-class ocean liners operated by the White Star Line. She was built by Harland Wolff Shipyard in Belfast, Ireland, and Thomas Andrews, which they portray in the movie, was the chief naval architect of the shipyard at the time, and he went down with the ship. Several people, which makes sense that, you know, several people that worked on the ship and built the ship, they were on the ship at the time. Titanic was under the command of Captain Edward Smith, who also went down with the ship. The ocean liner carried some of the wealthiest people in the world, as well as hundreds of immigrants from Great Britain and Ireland, Scandinavia, and elsewhere throughout Europe who were seeking a new life in the U.S. The first-class accommodation was designed to be the pinnacle of comfort and luxury, with a gymnasium, swimming pool, libraries, high-class restaurants, and opulent cabins. After leaving Southampton on the 10th of April, 1912, Titanic well, that's what they call it, but they stopped in France and Ireland before heading west to New York. On the 14th of April, 4 days into the crossing and about 375 miles south of Newfoundland, Canada, she hit an iceberg at 11:40 p.m. ship's time. The collision caused the hull plates to buckle inwards along her starboard right side and opened 5 of her 16 watertight compartments to the sea, which she could only survive 4 of them flooding. At 2:20 a.m., she broke apart and foundered with well over 1,000 people still on board. Just under 2 hours after Titanic sank, the Cunard liner RMS Carpathia arrived and brought aboard an estimated 705 survivors. The disaster was met with worldwide shock and outrage at the huge loss of life, as well as the regulatory and operational failures that led to it, which I'll talk about later. Public inquiries in Britain and in the U.S. led to major improvements in maritime safety. One of their most important legacies was the establishment of the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea in 1914, which still actually governs maritime safety today. Several new wireless regulations were passed around the world in an effort to learn from many missteps in wireless communications, which could have saved many more people. This was kind of cool. But Lisa, did you end up watching that special that I recommended on Disney Plus?
I put it on, but I didn't actually watch it.
Okay, no worries. But it's cool if anybody likes this type of stuff. There's a really cool, I think it's celebrating the 20th, I want to say, anniversary of the movie Titanic, the movie specifically, with James Cameron on Disney Plus, and they speak with relatives of the survivors as well as the guy who actually discovered the Titanic, which is really super cool in my opinion because of the way that it was found. But I don't know, I'm just kind of weird about that stuff. It was found in 1985, which was 73 years after the ship went down during a Franco-American expedition of the Navy. So it was like kind of like a secret expedition where they brought this guy on. He was like kind of like an expert in like marine archaeology and like this type of stuff. And their whole thing was they sent him on this mission to go find these submarines that went down in the area back in the I want to say 50s and 60s, but I don't actually remember. Don't quote me on that. To go find those just to pretty much confirm or deny whether or not Russia had gotten there first, because, you know, if anybody finds submarines, there's going to find some info. So they wanted to confirm whether or not anybody else had been there and found these submarines. And he found them like right off the bat. Like, he's that good. So he actually had like, I think they said like 13 days or something left in the mission that he could pretty much just go find the Titanic if he wanted to. And they found, based off of the debris of the submarines, like that it left a trail pretty much of like the current and how it sank. So using that, he was actually able to find, they went in a pattern, like they crisscrossed and like 0.9 miles apart from each other. And he was able to find the trail of debris from the Titanic, which led them to the wreck, which is like crazy. I don't know. It's just, it's so cool. I don't know. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was a lot of math. Yeah.
I'm sorry, did you say what year he found it?
1985.
85. Yeah. Oh. It's just crazy that it was already down there. It was already down there for 70 something years. That's just crazy. Last little bit here. The ship was split in two and gradually disintegrating at a depth of 12,415 feet. Titanic is the second largest ocean liner wreck in the world, only being surpassed by her sister ship, the HMHS Britannic. However, she's the largest sunk while in service as a liner, as the Britannic was used as a hospital ship at the time of her sinking during the war, which happened a lot. Actually, a lot of these passenger liners were repurposed for multiple wars to bring
I thought you were going to say
and supplies.
A lot of them sank.
I mean, that too, but ultimately due to the war, which, you know, it's kind of a given, I guess.
There's also a movie on Britannic, right? Is that
probably?
There's, yeah. I think they Britannic. Like played it as like a sequel to Titanic or whatever. I think so. I don't know if it was necessarily, but when I saw it, I took it as that. But I was younger when I saw that it came out, and I don't think it was obviously nowhere near as good as Titanic as a film. But I also thought that it was pretty much. I didn't watch it, but when I saw the movie for it, I guess I'm just saying off of my assumptions based off of knowing that it existed. I was like, how are they going to make that any different from Titanic? Like, it's probably the same exact type of story that they were trying to tell. But
oh yeah. All I wanted to say was that in the movie, they accurately portrayed it sinking because it did go down and then it broke and then it went this way and then it went. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, it was relatively
like what was happening behind me.
Yeah, it was relatively accurate to how they portrayed. Again, like in that special.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Because they said that it broke between the second and third steam thingies.
Yeah, steam thingies. Yeah. I know, now that you said steam thingies, now I can't think of the real word. The stacks. I don't even know. That special on Disney Plus, they actually go over it with a model because they're trying to decide if it broke clean off, or it's kind of funny. Like, James Cameron's so into this, like he's just so into it. It's hilarious. He even uses, which I think they pretty much are relatively certain that this is how it happened now, is that it did the banana peel method, which he showed on a banana. Like, when you break a banana in half and the top part will break clean off, but then the bottom peel will still be connected.
So yeah, I feel like that's almost how it looked in the movie too. Like, but you can't tell because the bottom, I guess, is
because it's underwater
already. But it didn't look like a clean break for sure. And
well, they did show the animation in the film as well. Like, when the people were trying to find the Titanic, they show like, this is what happened. Like, they're showing the old lady Rose, I guess. That, and you see it like on a screen, and it's kind of like showing like how it happened.
All I had to say about the Titanic is that it took about 2 hours and 40 minutes for it to sink, which is crazy because that's like almost the amount of time the whole movie was, right? Because it was like
they had a long time. I'm sorry, but they had a long time to get. No, I was live texting you guys. I'm just like, if I knew that I at least had an hour to figure my life out on the ship, I would have went and found a door. Like, if I knew I wasn't going to get on a lifeboat, like, come on, peeps. I mean, but
yeah. Well, I mean, there's also a reason, because I know I'm going to talk about it later about how third class was treated, but there's also a reason why that, I guess, whole time limit would have been kind of wouldn't have helped them a little bit as well. Mm-hmm. But I'll obviously get into that when I talk about
my prove me wrong, please.
Basically, the Titanic was kind of known as unsinkable. I mean, I don't think it was like rumor, it was like the sensationalize it out there like that, but I think that they thought it would be unsinkable because they had remote, like, new features in it that would remotely seal compartments, which you talked about. Is it could seal 4 and survive, but it had to seal, was it 4 or 5?
Four it could survive,
and
5 is why
there we
it's
go.
basically.
So yeah, they thought that with those features in it, if something did happen, then it wouldn't sink, but the worst happened.
Of course, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But yeah, the other thing is that because they thought they had this new feature, they were good, they didn't adequately prepare the crew and train them for an emergency like this. So the crew didn't even know how to handle a situation like this, nor did they know how to even, like, well, first evacuation, second even like getting the lifeboats out there and pulling him down, just like all the safety measures. The only thing the crew, I mean, I think it's a crew or a ship rule, like if something like this happens, it's the women and children first. And another thing about the lifeboats is that they, at the time, they didn't even use lifeboats as a kind of means to hold people, like a whole population of people, to until somebody arrives to rescue them. It's kind of like they had thought that a ship would already be there and it would be a passageway from the sinking one to the rescue one. It's not one where you can actually, so yeah, it's, I guess that's another reason why they didn't have as many as well, because they thought it would kind of go back and forth, right? But
they were basically too confident in that nothing was going to happen, so they didn't prepare for the inevitable. And
exactly.
So in the movie, there's a lot going on when, it starts sinking. The like the way that they portray the captain, like, my whole thing watching it, I was just like, well, what the heck is the captain doing? Like, I understand like how crews work, where you got to sleep at some point, like he was asleep and blah, blah, blah. Like, I understand that. But like, for some reason, the way that they portrayed in the movie, it made it seem like the captain did something wrong. And so I was just kind of just like, well, was the decisions that was it a misstep? Like, I was like really getting into this because I was just like, at the end, he was still hailed as a hero. So I was just like, okay, well, then obviously it's not just what the captain's decision was in these moments, because, it was like his decision plus his first mate's decision and all that other stuff, because technically he was asleep. But anywho, so I wanted to look further into all of the reasons why it sank, which there are quite a few reasons.
Do you remember in the movie where they asked, like, hey, where did those binoculars go? And they're like, we haven't seen them since blah, blah, blah.
I have that too.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. That's crazy. Yeah, I have that too. Another thing that they mention, they speak with, so besides the architect that they have on board and in the movie, they also portray the head of the White Star Lines. He's like the head executive. He's Bruce? On the ship. Ismay. Yeah. His whole thing was that they mentioned quite a bit the boilers, and how fast they could go and how fast they needed to go. So one thing was that it was just traveling too fast, especially for where it was in the ocean. From the beginning, some people had blamed the Titanic's skipper and captain for sailing the ship at a high speed of 22 knots through the iceberg-heavy waters of the North Atlantic. Some believe that Smith was trying to better the crossing time of Titanic's White Star sister ship, the Olympic. But in a 2004 paper, engineer Robert Essenhigh speculated that efforts to control a fire in one of the ship's coal bunkers could have explained why the Titanic was sailing at full speed. You're basically going through just like a minefield, essentially, of things that could just kill you, and you're going at full speed. It's just crazy.
Yeah, when I watched this film too, I was always curious as to why they would go through an area with such heavy like icebergs and stuff like that. Like, it never made sense to me. I don't know if that was the only path they could take or whatever, but I will also get to that.
Okay, good.
The wireless radio operator dismissed a key iceberg warning. So, less than an hour before the Titanic hit the iceberg, another nearby ship, the Californian, which I have my opinions about that ship, and I was trying to get to the bottom of why the heck that ship was not held accountable for pretty much letting people freaking die.
And that was the one that was like nearby?
Yes, that was the one that was nearby. Saw their flares, everything, saw their lights, and was just like, meh, whatever. I'll get to it. Yeah, so the California radioed to say that it had been stopped by a dense field of ice, but as the warning didn't begin with the prefix MSG, which stands for Master's Service Gram, which would have required the captain to directly acknowledge receiving the message, the Titanic's radio operator Jack Phillips considered the other ship's warning non-urgent and didn't pass it along. Didn't even know about it. Just briefly speaking on the Californian, which so so the Carpathia ultimately is the ship. They were much further out, but they were the ones that ended up coming to the rescue and saving all 705 people that were left alive. The Californian was much closer and could have saved hundreds of more lives if they would have responded.
I was gonna say, I heard that if it could have gotten there like around the time of the sinking and been able to take the people who were in the water, fell in the water, whatever, like it could have just basically helped save everybody, at least almost everybody, you know what I mean? Like versus
pretty much the people that had actually fallen into the water would have had a greater chance of survival. At least more people, because I think they only pulled like 6 people from the water alive.
I heard they pulled 9, but 3 of them passed away due to hypothermia, so 6 survived when that makes sense. Ones that pulled.
Which was kind of crazy, just even the hypothermia thing, because I guess like it's supposedly hypothermia, but realistically it's just your body's reaction to the freezing temperatures of the water. You were more likely to die of heart attack first.
Yeah, they called it like
so scary.
Just
I couldn't pronounce it.
Exposure, like that's how they call it. But I also heard that like basically if you're in the water, you could die within like 3 minutes. And I was like, what? You know, I would think that, because half of me when I was watching the movie and the people who like fell in the water, I was like, hey, it wasn't that bad, was it? You're in the water. It's water. You've got a life belt on, you're floating. Like what was so scary about getting in there? And then when I like heard the whole like you could die in like 3 minutes, I was like, oh.
I mean, even in the beginning when Jack first meets Rose, he's talking about how he would like jump in the ice cold water, and they even kind of mention it, like basically like your chances of survival, or I mean, I guess mainly he's talking about like hitting the water, but I mean, even then he does mention the coldness of the water and how basically you would die from it. I also saw that too, that they said that even Rose technically wouldn't have lived, even though she wasn't necessarily all the way in the water. If she was real, she wouldn't have lived because, I mean, it's freezing. And
there's a whole Mythbusters episode on the Titanic.
Oh yeah,
I actually know about that.
And they actually they built a dummy out of like gelatin and copper wire to test the theory of how long that you could be in, because it was like what, like 28 degrees or something like that, and the water's even colder. So they said that by the time, because supposedly Rose was like the last one that they picked up in the movie. So like she would almost like be gone pretty much, because while she wouldn't be as cold as Jack, who's in the water, she was still in the water at one point and her clothes were wet. So she was like pretty, like she wasn't faring much better pretty much. So
even though I knew in the back of my head how cold it was, I guess I just didn't imagine it to be so cold that it could kill you that quickly. So that's why when I saw the people in the water, I was like, it wasn't that bad, was it? And then I was like, oh shit.
Well, I mean, if you think about it too, like whenever you get cold, like whenever I get cold, like really, really, really cold, I feel like it's hard for my hands to even like
that was just what I was about to say. Yeah, because there's another like stage of it where you pretty much just can't even move any of your extremities pretty much, and you drown because you can't stay afloat anymore. Oh, so just to wrap up on the Californian. The Californian was closer and they had seen their flares, but at the time, which like I mentioned earlier, the Titanic, pretty much the sinking of this resulted in a lot of like regulations and like universal regulations pretty much, because at the time different colored flares meant different things, and also like different countries had different ways of reading flares. So this was a British ship, and I don't remember what the Californian was, but it was even contested what flares they were shooting off meant. So they weren't even sure if they were sending a distress signal. And also because of the direction that the ship was and how far it was into its sinking, they couldn't tell if it was sailing away or if it was sinking. And so they tried to radio them and everything, but I mean, obviously the ship was going down and there was no one going to be attending the radio. So they tried, but they were just like, the captain of the Carpathia went down as a hero, while the captain of the California was pretty much a villain and was like exiled.
Can I say something real fast too?
Yeah.
In the movie, you know how they're asking, like when they're all in the water, they're asking like, how come no one has come to save us yet? And wasn't it a thing? I'm pretty sure. I don't know if I'm misremembering. The Titanic sinks, how it's like supposedly you like kind of get sucked down in with it or whatever.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean,
I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah.
Like science, some science,
Yeah.
like because it's a pulling already down, it's going to continue pulling. Yeah.
I just couldn't remember if that was just something they said because that's why they were trying to get. But I, for some reason, thought that was one of the reasons why they said no ship had come to save them yet because they were trying to wait for it to like that and then like come. But I think I'm misremembering and I'm thinking of just the people. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, because Jack said it. Jack was like, when it goes down, it's going to suck us in and we have to like really kick and try to get us up.
Yeah.
Speaking on the ship's builders and architects, in 1985, when the American-French expedition finally located the historic wreck, investigators discovered that, contrary to earlier findings, the Titanic had not sunk intact after hitting the iceberg, but had broken apart on the ocean's surface. Material scientists Tim Folk and Jennifer Hooper McCarty have cast blame on more than 3 million rivets that held the hull's steel plates together. They examined rivets brought up from the wreck and found them to contain a high concentration of slag, a smelting residue that can make metal split apart. This may have weakened the part of the Titanic's hull that hit the iceberg, causing it to break apart upon impact.
Oh yeah, I heard that they used that because they were trying to build it under budget or something like that.
Which makes sense because it was already going to be an expensive ship. I mean, yeah.
And also for speed because they built it like really quickly too, right?
Yeah. They were trying to, so I said earlier, Cunard, which was another, what is it, like liner or ocean liner company, which had the Carpathia.
The one that they ended up getting together later.
I don't know, did they?
Because White Star Line eventually, I think, was losing money during the Great Depression, and they ended up. Because I wanted to look up the White Star Line, like, what are y'all up to now? And I know during the Great Depression, they ended up teaming up with their rival company, and I remember it started with a C, but I don't remember how to pronounce it.
Yeah, it might have been Cunard then.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were a couple companies that they were kind of up against, in terms of luxury and speed and size. So, yeah, it's not too surprising that they tried to cut costs in order to get this ship in the water.
Really gonna cut costs? Like, I just don't. Whenever
they do it now,
and I'm saying, like, even when I think I was talking, that whole incident that happened where those Marines and the Navy person went on, I forget what it is, in the water over here, and they died. Like 8 of them died. I don't know if you guys heard about that.
Possibly.
Okay, well, it was like something that happened, and I forget what it's called. It's like some type of vehicle that they go in that can go into the water or whatever, had like some type of leak or something, and basically it sunk. And this was like a training exercise, and all these kids basically died. One was actually from my hometown, and yeah, it was really sad. And
oh no!
And we were talking about it, and it's because these things that they were in have been used for like years and years, and it's like something that they cut costs on. I'm like, why would that's not something that you cut costs on when it's like going to be carrying people who like their lives are at stake and they're counting on this thing to work. So it's like, why would you cut costs on, like, it doesn't make any sense
because the military.
I know, but I'm just saying, like, in general, like, even for the Titanic, I'm like, you don't cut costs on things that actually matter, like for the integrity of the vessel that you're in. It just makes me upset because I'm like, come on.
We had said earlier the ship had the new technology where you could seal the compartments, and that, coupled with this, it's just kind of like all of the things happened that shouldn't have happened. They could have survived, and it's all of the worst things happened. Mirages and hazy horizons
I think I did hear
created
about this.
by weather conditions. So 2 studies done around the time of the 100th anniversary of the Titanic disaster in 2012 suggested that nature played a key role in the ship's fate. The first argued that Earth came unusually close to both the moon and the sun that year, increasing the gravitational pull on the ocean and producing record tides, which caused increased amounts of floating ice in the North Atlantic around the time of the sinking, which is crazy. Nature, man. I guess it's just crazy. The second study by British historian Tim Moulton claimed that the atmospheric conditions on the night of the disaster might have caused a phenomenon called superrefraction. This bending of light could have created mirages or optical illusions that prevented the Titanic's lookouts from seeing the iceberg clearly. It also would have made the Titanic appear closer and smaller to the nearby ship, the Californian, causing its crew to assume it was a different ship without a radio, preventing them from attempting to communicate. From their vantage point, and with these hazy conditions, when the Titanic started to sink, the Californian's crew would have thought it was merely sailing away. Makes sense. Only
I did hear about
the Californian in a better light, though. Still salty about the Californian.
But no, I did actually hear about that like years ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird. The binoculars, which you had brought up earlier. Yeah, the lookouts had no binoculars. So Second Officer David Blair, who held the key to the Titanic's store of binoculars in his pocket, was transferred off the ship before it left for its maiden voyage from Southampton and forgot to hand over the key to the officer who was to replace him. At a later inquiry into the sinking, a lookout on the Titanic said binoculars might have helped them spot and dodge the iceberg in time.
So all I have to say is that in the movie, when they spotted the iceberg, I felt like it was right in front of their face. I was kind of like, you can't see that like farther away.
Up,
you know what I
They
mean?
It was a mirage. It was refraction. Okay.
Iceberg straight ahead.
I know. It's like, bro, it's like literally right there.
Yeah. Well, another thing that they said about that, though, was that because the ship was so large and this was like its maiden voyage, that even the captain wasn't used to a ship of this size, and that it just like it couldn't turn quickly enough, and that he didn't know.
They even showed in the movie the efforts of turning it and how they were like, why isn't it turning yet? And I was thinking, because it's huge, man.
Yeah. This is hella morbid. Blair, that second officer, kept the key as a memento of his near miss with death, and it was auctioned off in 2007 and fetched some 90,000 euros.
Just the key?
Yep. Just the key that could have saved everybody's life. And then the last reason that you had brought up was that there just wasn't enough lifeboats. So no matter what caused the Titanic to sink, such a massive loss of life could have probably been avoided if the ship had carried sufficient lifeboats for its passengers and crew. But the White Star liner left Southampton with only 20 lifeboats, the legal minimum, with a total capacity of 1,178 people. Though Maurice Clark, the civil servant who inspected the Titanic in Southampton, recommended it carry 50% more lifeboats. His handwritten notes at the time later revealed that he felt his job would have been threatened if he did not give the famous ship the go-ahead to sail. Due to the chaos that ensued after the Titanic struck an iceberg, the 20 lifeboats departed the ship with some 400 empty seats, leaving more than 1,500 people to perish in the frigid ocean waters. Because I was just trying to figure out, because the lifeboats didn't look that large, so I was just like, how many people could fit? And I'm like, well, then how many people could fit on this ship? So the Titanic could carry up to 2,435 passengers, and a crew of approximately 900 brought the capacity to 3,300 people on this ship. So even if the lifeboats, like I said, were filled to capacity during this evacuation, there was only like one third of those on board could even get on the lifeboats. So there just wasn't a chance for the majority of people.
I also heard that one of the reasons why they didn't put enough lifeboats on there was for
aesthetics.
Yes, aesthetics. I was like, are you kidding me?
It would crowd the decks, and then where would everybody walk around and look out at the ocean?
It's like the same with the steam thingies. They only needed 3, but they put 4 because it looked better. And I was like, and they used the 4th one, I think, to like help with the filtration of air and stuff like that.
They still do that. They still do that today with cruise ships. You only really need like 1 or 2, but some ships they'll like add an extra one just because it looks nice. And it really does nothing, which I thought was kind of silly.
How much did that cost?
I know. And as a transition into some of the peeps on the ship, I also was curious about just the survival rate. I mean, besides, the 1/3 and all of that, I had the percentages of people who did survive. So for the most part, most of the well-known people on board were first-class passengers, obviously. Researcher Chuck Annecy crunched the numbers, breaking down the demographics of the survivors. He found that 97.22% of the 144 female first-class passengers were rescued, while only 32.57% of their 175 male counterparts were saved. So that's pretty, even just for first class, that's rough. Ultimately, he found that male second class passengers fared the worst in terms of survival, with only 14 out of 168 making it out alive. So the total survival rate for women was 74%, while the male survival rate was only 20%.
Damn.
What about kids? Did you look at the kids?
I didn't look at kids, but I think they may have lumped them in with women because it was women and children.
Yeah, that's true. I think most of the kids survived. All I have to say is that they did show a couple of the first class people in the movie choosing to stay, and they were like, oh, I'm in my best suit or whatever. They even talk about the Macy's couple. You guys know who I'm talking about?
Yeah, the Strausses.
Yeah, how they decided to stay. I have a lot of respect for them because, them sacrificing their life so somebody else can have a chance on a lifeboat is, they have, the privilege of getting on there, but they instead chose to stay back for somebody else. I think that's
those scenes in the movie where it's the woman with her kids and then that old couple, that was the saddest thing, because
the old couple is the Strausses.
Yeah, that was so sad. That was but I mean, it kind of makes sense then, because of not that many people live, so I think they just decided to kind of take it into their own hands in that sense too. But that was the most depressing, I think, part.
Honestly, you want to know something even more depressing? For researching for this movie, they dove 12 times or something like that before they even started production, James Cameron and the crew. And obviously, I was going to say obviously, that's, I don't know why anybody would know this, but at that depth, bodies decompose pretty quickly. So kind of speaking back on the Holocaust Museum, pretty much the only thing that's left is the shoes. So they found a cabin that had a pair of shoes, a woman's pair of shoes and a child's pair of shoes, and then the hairbrush and a mirror. And so so when they show that scene of the mom and the daughter, they kind of base it off of the actual discovery. Yeah, it's pretty sad.
The scene that broke my heart was when the kid was crying and he was like, no, go with your mom and your sister. There's another boat for daddies. I'm going to start crying because I was like, oh my God, I'm sure a bunch of dads told their kids that, and they knew. And then they said a lot of dads didn't survive.
No, yeah, it's very depressing and sad. And it's just crazy that these types of events happen to people. And just imagining that type of fear is just crazy. You can't really imagine it. It's just weird.
And even, just another circumstantial thing, but it's just if they were sailing anywhere south, they probably would have even that they would have had a better chance. It's just so circumstantial. It's just it sucks.
Pretty much every bad thing that could have happened to the ship happened to the ship. Everything that could have gone wrong went wrong, basically.
Yeah, for sure.
All I have to say about Jay Bruce is that I think it's really tough to be in his position. He was the chairman of the White Star Line and obviously the guy who approved the build of this ship. He was on the maiden voyage. They also have a scene of him in Titanic where he was helping assist people onto a boat and then he just decided to get in. And you could tell, even in the movie, the actor portrayed him as being kind of ashamed of doing that.
But he was a douche in the movie.
Yeah, he was.
I don't know if that's how the real guy was, but in the movie, I hated him.
They portrayed him that way because of just the fact that the ship was going so fast. And I think that it was easy to correlate.
Him, right?
Correlate that with him and wanting to beat the record of the other ship.
So the things that I kind of looked up was that, he obviously faced a lot of scrutiny for what had happened. They try to blame a lot of it on him. He did resign. He was no longer the White Star chairman or whatever. And he kind of pretty much lived the rest of his life depressed and not in solitude, because he did still have his wife and children, but he kind of had a cottage that he'd go to all the time, spent a lot of time just doing a lot of solo things, going to the theater by himself, fishing by himself, things like that. And he never really spoke about what happened other than when he had to talk about it with the authorities, and I think during the case as well. But it was told that one of his grandkids went up to him and was like, "Grandpa, have you ever been on a ship?" And he's like, "I was once on a ship that was deemed unsinkable." And that was like the only thing he ever said about it to his family after years and years of being quiet about it. I think it's really, I don't know, it's tough because he didn't mean for that to happen to everybody. And it did take a toll on his mental health.
Of course, though. I feel like if no matter what his intentions were, I feel like if all that happened and even maybe he did feel some like accountability for it, of course, if you feel like you were the cause of death of thousands or hundreds of people, that would definitely mess you up mentally.
Yeah. I think I also read that they blame him for the speed of the ship, but there's actually like no record of him telling anybody to like go faster for the press or anything like that. And they did say that he was assisting people getting on the lifeboats, and it wasn't that shameful thing of he like took a place of a woman or a child kind of situation. I mean, I don't know what really happened, but it's just kind of what they said took place and also what other people had said about him. But who I wanted to talk about was the unsinkable Molly Brown. And two other people, but she's like the coolest one to me. So Molly Brown, she was played by Kathy Bates in the movie. She did portray her pretty accurately. They did say she came from like new money, which was pretty true. She didn't grow up with the wealth. She even said that she didn't marry a rich man, but actually what happened,
is a rich man.
Yeah, she is. So in 1893, her husband JJ's mining engineering efforts proved to be instrumental. That's how they gained their wealth. Even though her and her husband did separate in 1909, she did receive a cash settlement, maintained possession of the house in Denver and their summer home, and she received $700 a month, which is now $19,919 a month, so almost $20,000 a month.
Damn.
Yeah. They never reconciled, but they still kept in touch and cared for each other throughout their lives. So Molly was in Paris, France, hanging out with the richest man in the world. He was in the movie. His name was John Jacob Alstor the Fourth. What a name, John Jacob. He was like apparently the richest man in the world. I guess his wealth was like 2 billion dollars. Okay, sorry, that's our money. But at the time, it was something like $1 million.
Doesn't he also have something to do with the Waldorf Astoria hotels?
Yeah, that's his like rival, but also that was his cousin. So that was his like rival, cousin, family rival, whatever. And I think they ended up merging the hotels or something like that. But yeah, it does.
Merging. I thought you said murdering. I was like, what?
No, I'm sorry. Well, obviously after he passed away, like, what's gonna happen? I think his cousin might have honored him, but I didn't look too much into him. I wanted to, but I didn't get the chance to.
You were like, Lisa, stay in the lane.
Yeah, exactly. Molly received word that her eldest grandchild was seriously ill, and so she booked the first available passage to New York, which was the Titanic. So when the Titanic started to sink, Molly helped others board the lifeboats, and even took an oar of her own. She was finally persuaded to get on a lifeboat, which was lifeboat number 6. She was nicknamed the unsinkable Molly Brown by authors because she helped the ship's evacuation. She took that oar and urged the lifeboat to go back to save more people. So that scene in the movie was kind of accurate. Basically, when she was in the lifeboat, they can hear the screaming. They like saw the ship sink, and she was like, "We have to go back, guys! Come on, we have to go back." And she did argue with the crewman or the head crewman on the lifeboat because he did say, "We can't go back because if we go back, they're going to swarm our lifeboats, bring us down with them." I understand that, but I do think that they could have gone back and tried to organize it, In the movie, she did end up sitting back down, but from what I read, she was arguing with him for quite some time about going back. They don't know for sure if the boat ever did go back or not. Molly Brown's fame as the Titanic survivor helped her promote the issues she felt strongly about, like the rights of women and workers, education and literacy for children, historical preservation and commemoration of the bravery and chivalry displayed by the men aboard the Titanic. During World War I in France, she did work with the American Committee for Devastated France to rebuild areas behind the front line and helped the wounded French and American soldiers. And in 1985, she was inducted into the Colorado Women's Hall of Fame. She did die in her sleep at 10:55 p.m. on October 26 in 1932. She was 65 years old, and an autopsy revealed that she had a brain tumor. Honestly, like what I think shows the difference between her and maybe the other women aboard is that she, like they said, she's from new money. So she spent a time in her life, you know, struggling, actually getting her hands dirty, while the other women maybe never had to experience that. And maybe that's why they didn't have that guilt feeling, I want to say, when it came to helping, assisting, and also wanting to go back. I don't know, obviously, but I think that's how my opinion of Molly is that she's has so much that she wants to give back because she's actually experienced it firsthand.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, they did when she was talking to the crew member trying to get them to go back. I mean, there was like this definite like look of like guilt among all the other women on the ship, but yeah, I think ultimately it probably came down to the fact that she's lived it and they haven't.
Yeah. I would say there's a disconnect between those women and the people that, you know, were second, third class, so they couldn't relate to them, but obviously she could.
So next person I wanted to talk about was Violet Jessup. Violet Jessup was an Argentinian ocean liner stewardess known to have survived 2 ships sinking.
Yeah. I read about this person. I forgot her name, but yeah.
She began working as a stewardess for the White Star vessel, the RMS Olympic, on the 20th of September 1911. The Olympic collided with the British warship, the HMS Hawke. There were no fatalities, and despite the damage of the ship, it was able to make it back to the port without sinking. And then in 1912, Violet boarded the Titanic again as a stewardess. She was 24 at the time, and 4 days later, the Titanic hit the iceberg and began to sink. She described it in her memoirs that she was ordered up to the deck basically because I guess she didn't really have much she could do because she didn't really speak English, and she didn't really understand their instructions, or she couldn't really provide any instructions. She watched the crew load the lifeboats and was ordered onto lifeboat number 16. And as the boat was being lowered, an officer gave her a baby to look after. And after the rescue, she said a woman came over and grabbed the baby and ran off, not saying a word. And she never saw them again.
Oh, God.
I know. It's like, what?
Freaking weird.
I know. So then during World War I, Violet was a stewardess for, we all know it, the HMHS Britannic, the White Star line for, and it was like converted into the hospital ship. So the morning of November 20th, 1916, she was on the Britannic and it began to sink. It sank in 55 minutes, killing only 30 people out of the 1,066 on board. In 2016, they did a major diving expedition to kind of see what happened, and it was determined that the ship had struck a deep sea mine. Violet almost died during this sinking because the propellers were sucking the lifeboats under the stern, and she had to jump out of the lifeboat, and it resulted in a traumatic head injury, but she still survived. She described the scene of the Britannic sinking as the white pride of the ocean's medical world dipped her head a little, then a little lower, and still lower. All the deck machinery fell into the sea like a child's toy. Then she took a fearful plunge, her steam rearing hundreds of feet into the air until its final roar, she disappeared into the depths. And then she went back to work for White Star Line in 1920.
How did she not get the name Unsinkable and Molly Brown?
I know, girl, right?
Like, because she was a stewardess.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm like, she's like a cat with 9 lives. Like, damn,
right?
I would never.
Well, wait till you hear about the other guy.
Oh, God.
Violet did pass away in 1971 at age 83. So White Star Line never took her.
Good for her. She lived a good long life.
Exactly. So the next person is Arthur Priest. Arthur was a fireman and a stoker and survived 5 ship sinkings, including the Titanic, Austrias, Alcatrana, Britannic, and the Dongal. So him and Violet were both on the Titanic and the Britannic.
What the hell is going on?
That's why, okay.
Well, because they were experienced in the job, so it was an easy hire, especially for a new ship. They wanted experienced people.
Yeah, but then that's why when I was reading about him, they were trying to say like, oh, shipwrecks or ship sinking, anything like that were common, and that's why he experienced 5.
I've read it both ways, but yeah.
Because of his survival, he got the nickname the Unsinkable Stoker. On the ships he worked as a stoker, which basically was he's the guy who's like tending the fires. He did say like after 5-6 ships sinking, he finally retired and just stayed on dry land. He also said no one wished to sail with him after these disasters. He did pass away at age 49 in 1937 from pneumonia. I didn't read much about him.
He was in the war, so the other times that he went down, it was it was in the war. One thing that I did read, at least it was kind of crazy that he was able to survive all the times that he did, because like you said, he was a stoker. He was down in the boiler room, and it was like a legit maze to even get up to a level of the ship where he could have escaped. The odds were against him every single time. And because there was also, in the article that I was reading, there was also another person, I can't remember what, he wasn't in the boiler room, but he was another crew member that had served with him a couple times on some ships, but he ultimately, I think, died in the war. But he at the same thing, it's just like they were experienced and they wanted experienced people, and so they kept getting hired for all of these same ships. And I mean, I guess they were resilient.
Him and Violet sound like very, very humble people. But
if I was a survivor, I think after the second time it happened, I wouldn't get on a ship again.
Yeah, exactly.
I know.
It's like clearly the odds are stacked against you, and you just, like you said, it's just like, who would ever want to sail with you? You just got to be so unlucky.
Exactly.
Well, I just wouldn't trust boats anymore after that.
Oh yeah, that too.
Yeah, I'd be like, every single boat keeps sinking. These people don't know how to build these damn boats, so I'm not getting on them anymore.
Real. Especially freaking White Star Lines. Like, what the heck? Don't sail with them. Go to Cunard or something.
Exactly. I had to put it in that Violet went back to work for White Star Line in 1920. Like, I wouldn't. I'd be like, oh,
Hell no.
Nope. I'd peace out for their competition for sure.
I wanted to get into more of historical people that were put into the movie, but there was just too many.
There were quite a few. I mean, I feel like there was something else that we watched where they kind of did it this way, where they just went around the room and basically gave like a brief like overview of who each person was. And that's what Rose does in the movie when her and Jack are in the dining room. They're like, or in the lounge, I guess. She's like, here's this person, and this is why they're famous. Like, she kind of gives like a little bit of a rumor gossipy take on them. But pretty much, I believe every person that she mentions is a real person, a real one of like, I think 12 or 13 really famous people that were on the ship. It was kind of a cool, like, quick, easy way to be like, oh, also these really famous people like the Strausses and Guggenheim, which I think was he a railroad tycoon, I believe. I don't know. He up there with Astor or Alster or whatever the other guy you were talking about. He was also like one, I think from what I read, I thought Guggenheim was richer than Astor, because I thought he was like a railroad and like tycoon of some sort. Anywho, but yeah, I don't know. He was another person that they mentioned briefly too. I don't know. She goes around the room, but yeah. I thought that was a cool way of doing that and acknowledging that those people were there, because their relatives are still alive.
Yeah, definitely.
In that special, they have them on there and they talk to them.
I need to watch that special now.
It's cool. I don't know. I don't know.
Well, speaking on division of class, then I guess that's a good segue. So obviously we see in the film that class division is kind of a big deal. You know, we see it again between the relationship between Jack and Rose, and we see it in the scenes depicting the third class passengers being denied exit to make it to the lifeboats. So I first wanted to talk about the division of class and what the third class passengers and cabins and accommodations look like in comparison, and not in comparison, but just what they look like in general. First and third class passengers were divided, meaning that if Jack and Rose were real life people, they actually would have never met on the Titanic, because first class people had their own area of the boat and third class people had their own, so they would have never actually crossed paths. Back then, the class system was very important, so there was no mingling between the classes. Rude. So the third class cabins were more comfortable than other cabins offered by competitors of the Titanic White Star Line. Although it was still pretty small and they were located in the least desirable parts of the ship, the cabins were paneled in white painted pine with salmon pink linoleum floor. They were furnished with plumbed-in washbins, mattresses, and White Star bed linens. Their public areas consisted of 4 main rooms in addition to an outdoor space. They had a dining saloon, a gathering room, a smoking room, and a general room for recreation. Now, when the Titanic starts sinking in the film, there are gates that locked them on their floors, making it so they had to wait to get on a lifeboat after the first and second class passengers got on their boat. Like, that's how they portray it in the film, I guess is what I'm meaning. How like they basically are like, "What, let us through?" And the guy's like, "No, we have to wait till the other people get on their boats." So this is kind of true. the people are saying that they didn't do this to like lock them, but basically most people dispute this for reasons I'm going to get into. I feel like personally that they did kind of trap them a little bit, at least for a few minutes. So yeah, there were gates, but these weren't in place because of, like they're saying they weren't in place for class discrimination. Most third class passengers were immigrants, like I think Alex said, or someone said earlier. And U.S. immigration laws at the time required immigrants to keep separate until they reached Ellis Island and could be screened for diseases and processed into the country.
There was that one scene where there was like a family and they were trying to read the sign and he was like going through his book. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that.
All right, I was just gonna say also in the very beginning too, they show them briefly like looking in people's mouths and stuff and screening them for stuff. And then when Jack jumps on the boat, he's like, "I'm American. What are you talking about? Like, I don't have any of that. Of course I went. What's fine? Let me on the ship."
Yeah, totally. So apparently each class had their own decks and lifeboats, and the gates were opened as soon as the crew was ordered to lower the lifeboats. But even though they weren't prevented from reaching the lifeboats, it is most likely that first and second class reached the lifeboats first due to their location. So third class did have their own lifeboats, like I already said, but third class lifeboats were not stored in the third class sections of the ship. Third class passengers had to find their way through a maze of corridors and staircases to reach the boat deck. So that's why I was saying earlier that their odds were a little bit less because of these reasons. And I also read that, again, yes, they opened the gates for them when they were, when they didn't keep the gates locked and prevent them from exiting. So they opened the gates for them, but it most likely wasn't until after the first lifeboats were launched, since the people who needed to open the gates were waiting for instruction to do so. And although it wasn't malicious intent to prevent third class passengers from reaching the lifeboats, class did make a difference in this aspect. And less than 1/3 of steerage passengers survived. So steerage, I guess, is another word for third class passengers, whatever. So yeah, that was kind of messed up. So I don't know. So I feel like they were trying to make it seem like they weren't like as locked in like they were in the movie, but it kind of was, and some like they did have to wait a few minutes to get that clearance for them to open the gates, and then they opened the gates and let them through right when they were told to, but they still had to wait. Like those minutes are vital when you're trying to escape for your life.
Yeah, and it's kind of like what you said. It's just like they were awaiting orders and stuff, and I think somebody mentioned earlier too, the crew members weren't trained on it.
Yeah.
So they just had no clue. Like they had no evacuation procedure at all. So and they were just left to fend for themselves because they weren't first class, and it's just like meh, figure it out.
Yeah, and it's just sad, especially considering that, like I said, they didn't keep their lifeboats on their deck. Like
the odds were stacked against them for sure.
But yeah, so
and they were immigrants and probably couldn't read any signs, like Lisa had said. Like
exactly, that's how the third class were treated, and why their odds were against them. And I don't know. I just wanted to mention that too, because like I said, like I feel like class is a big part in the movie Titanic. With Rose and all that. So
you may have said this, and I didn't hear you, but did you mention how in reality Jack wouldn't have ever been let near?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good. I thought that was a really interesting point.
Yeah.
How you wouldn't even have been in that deck or near Rose at all.
They would have never met. And
at all.
But I think that is like how I think it was Lisa that said it earlier, that it was kind of used as a way for us to see all of Titanic, which I think it's pretty cool that they did it that way, because
makes sense.
First class would have never known what it was like to be in third class and vice versa.
Also, a weird side thought that I just had based off of what Lisa said from the other ship, and also the fact that they show Cal take that third class kid or whatever and then like give him to some lady on the boat. You know how weird it would be, like being a kid and then like your new family is pretty much just like whoever, well, I mean, if they're a nice person, the person that rescued you from the boat or whatever, or from the ship sinking. Like that's, or just
even
weird.
That baby that they handed to Violet, like the lady who took the baby that's
what made me
baby.
think of it. Exactly. It's just like all of these kids that were misplaced with random people, and maybe some were reunited. I mean, there were a lot of people who met their families once they got to New York, like, or their like extended families and stuff like that. But I'm sure there were some people that either were put in orphanages or were raised by these people that just randomly. Like, who are you people? Type of a thing. And that's weird to think about.
I did hear that afterwards they did try to raise some money both in the UK and in the US as like kind of a relief fund. It doesn't sound like it was that much money, to be honest. I think it was as much as people could raise at the time. I think a lot of people needed it because obviously a lot of their husbands passed away and they were the ones who were working at the time.
Also, yeah, speaking of that, when they got to New York, I can't remember exactly. I should have probably wrote it down. I don't know. I didn't know how long this was going to go. And so I didn't want to like get too into like what happened when they got back and all of the trials that they held and the people that they held accountable and blah, blah, blah. But there were a few charities that like met them there when they got into New York and provided them with assistance. And then I saw too that there were some first class passengers that pulled money together to give to the crew of Carpathia, because they rescued them, which I think it amounted to them splitting like $90,000 or something. So I was like, wow, that's nice of them.
Also, since the movie also talked about the necklace was fake.
No,
there was no necklace.
Yeah, I guess we'll point that out. Yeah.
I just mentioned it really briefly.
Yeah, I know. And I texted you guys that like they had one close up where like the stone just like looked so bumpy and weird. I was like, who's on the props department? But apparently they did hire like a jewelry company, and it was Cubic Zirconia, I guess. So I don't know what that up close shot was and why it looked so bad, but there were like 3 different necklaces and like
even the chain looked really bad, dude. I was like,
it was weird.
My God.
But like an actual jewelry company made the necklace. I don't know.
It's a bad look on them then.
I don't know though, because they were like selling replicas of it and like people,
That's
people
true.
into that stuff.
But the replicas, at least the ones that I saw, were like a lot smaller.
Yeah, I mean, so you could wear them.
Yeah.
And not be, it's like the people that, silly side tangent, it's like the people that buy replica jewelry of the British royals because they sell replicas of like their wedding jewelry and stuff.
Damn.
And it's so strange to me. I'm kind of surprised Lisa doesn't own it, but
because I don't like sapphires.
Oh, okay.
Or rubies.
You already know though.
Do we have any final thoughts on Titanic, the movie, or the actual events that took place?
All I wanted to say was that there was one scene that always sticks out to me because I forget this scene exists until I see it every single time, is when Rose emerges from the water and everyone's in the water screaming and panicking and she's like, Jack, where are you? I always,
No, that's come back.
Yeah, come back, Jack.
No, but before that, because it's jarring to see, but I know that probably happens in real life, is that anybody who was in the water was probably like panicking. There's probably like 1,000,002 people around you. You don't even know where your loved one is. And I have to point that scene out. I think it was a good one out of all the cheesy ones.
Did you know that they were 23 and 24 when filming this? I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, he filmed it right
young.
when he was also filming Romeo and Juliet, right?
Like right before or right after, I think.
Something like that, yeah.
I want to say after, because I think that James Cameron kind of used that as a selling point for the movie. Like having it be like a Romeo and Juliet type thing at the sea. And like, let's cast Leo because he's in his prime of the 90s, So, yeah, but I was like, oh, little babies. Also, I didn't realize they were so close in age either.
I know. I always thought she was a lot older than him.
Yeah, she was only a year older. Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks for joining us this week on the Internet Historians. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts and give us a rating. If you also want to follow us on Instagram, we give some sneak peeks on there or like pictures of stuff. So I'll be putting some images of Unsinkable Molly Brown and whatnot on there. And we also have a YouTube so you can see our faces while we're talking if you prefer that. Next week, we'll be discussing Marie Antoinette from the movie Marie Antoinette. So don't forget to tune in. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.